Hey guys, today we are going to be talking about types of sentences. And when I say types of sentences, I don't mean the types of sentences like declarative, imperative, interrogative. I'm referring to the sentence structures because we do have four types of sentence structures in the English language, and it's important to know all of them. So this will be focused on the grammatical portion of these sentences today. And so, first of all, I want to talk about the importance of knowing a variety of sentence structures and using a variety of sentence structures. If you are using all four of them interchangeably, it really helps you develop a unique writing style. You don't become boring and you can express yourself in a different way. And also, it keeps your reader interested and attentive. If you're using the same type of sentence structure, let's say simple sentence structures, it can be really overly simple or become monotonous in your writing. And so your reader just becomes really bored and they may not be able to focus easily on what you're trying to say. Also, if you're using excessively long sentences, it can really confuse your reader. Especially in the English language, we typically only have 3 to 4 clauses being the maximum length of a sentence. And so if you're going longer than that, I think most English speakers just don't have the attention span to focus on that because our language doesn't use that. And so it's important to avoid overly long sentences as well to avoid confusion in your reader. And finally, I want to focus on this because I'm hoping to reduce sentence fragments in your writing. And we'll talk more about what a sentence fragment is, but it's not a sentence. And so if you know the sentence structures and what a clause is, then hopefully you will reduce the amount of sentence fragments in your writing. Okay, so just a brief outline of what we'll be talking about. First of all, we will do a review of clauses, what a clause is, the different types of clauses. Next, we'll be focusing on the 4 types of sentence structures. And then finally, we're going to have a brief discussion on how to lengthen and how to shorten your sentences depending on which type of problem you may have. It tends to go one way or the other, and I think that's all depending on your native language and even just your personality and your writing style. Maybe even your field of study would affect this. So we're going to talk about what it looks like to lengthen or shorten sentences. Okay, so first of all, our clause review. This is going to be quick and brief because I plan to cover clauses with more depth in a couple of weeks because clauses are really complex. So today it's just going to be a quick, brief review. Hopefully you are familiar with what a clause is, and so this will be a review, as will all of the grammar in this course, hopefully. And so the 3 types of clauses, or the 2 types of clauses we're going to talk about are independent clauses and dependent clauses, and then we'll end this section discussing sentence fragments. Okay, so first, independent clauses. So as you know, any clause has to contain both a subject and a verb. If it does not have both a subject and a verb, then it is not a clause. And so an independent clause, of course, has a subject and a verb, and it also completes a thought. It requires no additional information. It uses a period at the end of it, and it can stand alone. And so when you have an independent clause, you're not waiting for more information. You're not waiting for the writer to say something else. The thought is complete. And so here I have 2 examples. I own 2 dogs. It's a complete thought. The subject is I, the verb is own. There are no transitional phrases that indicate that you're waiting for other information, and it ends with a period. So this is an independent clause. The second example, Harold visited Hawaii last year. Again, it's a full and complete thought. You're not waiting on any other information to finish the thought. The subject is Harold, and the verb is visited. Okay, so now let's move on to dependent clauses. So dependent clauses are exactly how they sound. They depend on other information. So like all clauses, they contain a subject and a verb. But a dependent clause is not a complete thought. It requires some more information, so therefore it cannot use a period by itself and it cannot stand alone. And so here I have two different sentences that include an independent clause along with a dependent clause. So the first sentence I have is, my mother called me while I was driving to the bank. So in this sentence, the dependent clause is the underlined portion, while I was driving to the bank. It has a subject, I, and a verb, was driving. However, while I was driving to the bank is not a complete thought. You have lots of other questions if that's all that you're reading. You're thinking, what were you doing while you were driving to the bank? What happened? What else? And so it needs to be with a dependent clause, which it is in this sentence. My mother called me. The second sentence, even though I wanted to teach English abroad, I love teaching in Memphis. So again, the underlined portion is the dependent clause, even though I wanted to teach English abroad. The subject in this section is I. The verb, wanted to teach, I guess you could add that too. But again, it has that phrase even though at the beginning, and so you're waiting on more information. This is not a complete thought, therefore it cannot stand alone, and so this is a dependent clause. And also, there are three types of dependent clauses, and we will discuss these more at a later date, which are noun clauses, adjective clauses, and adverb clauses. And all of these different types of clauses act exactly like the part of speech that's in its name. So a noun clause acts as a noun, adjective clause as an adjective, and an adverb clause as an adverb. But again, we'll talk about this more at a later date. Okay, to end this section on our clause review, I want to talk about sentence fragments. And so a sentence fragment is a group of words marked by a period that either does not contain both a subject and a verb or does not complete a thought. And so like we said before, a independent clause has a subject and a verb, and it is a complete thought, which means it can stand alone. And so often, sentence fragments are dependent clauses with a period and without an independent clause. And so here I have three examples. The first two are from the previous examples that I had in the dependent clause section, while I went to the bank, period. It's not a complete sentence, therefore this clause alone becomes a sentence fragment and needs to be changed. Even though I wanted to teach abroad, period. Again, it's not a complete thought. The reader is waiting for more information. And finally, having a new job. So this is actually not even a clause, having a new job. There's no subject and there's not a complete verb. Therefore, this phrase is a sentence fragment and cannot be by itself. So again, these are not sentences and therefore they are incorrect. We want to avoid sentence fragments in our writing. Okay, now let's move on to the four types of sentence structure. So this will be the main part of our lesson today. And there are four types. We have the simple sentence, the compound sentence, the complex sentence, and the compound complex sentence. You've probably heard of these before, but we're just going to go over them briefly so that you become aware and maybe you can learn to use more of a variety in your writing. So the first type of sentence structure is the simple sentence, which is pretty simple as it sounds. It has one independent clause, and that's it. And so I have three examples here that I want to show you. The first one, Elizabeth went on a vacation. Elizabeth is the subject, went is the verb, and then we have this phrase, on a vacation, to describe where she went. But yeah, that's it. It's just one independent clause with the subject and the verb, and it's a complete thought. But I want you to be careful because sometimes simple sentences look a little more complex than they are when actually they still only have one subject and one verb. It may be a compound subject or a compound verb with a participle, but it's still a simple sentence because the extra information is included in phrases rather than clauses. So that's like the second two examples I have here. The second one, my friend Elizabeth went on a vacation last summer. So this is the same sentence as the first. I've just added extra information, my friend and last summer. But again, it's still a simple sentence. And then the third example, my parents and their friends decided to plan a vacation to the Bahamas. Again, this is a kind of a long sentence. It's a good sentence, but it's still a simple sentence. The subject is my parents and their friends. It's one unit. It's a compound subject, but it's still one unit, therefore one subject. And the verb is decided to plan. So decided is the main verb, and to plan is the extra infinitive added on, but still one verb. And then we have the complement, or the rest of the sentence, a vacation to the Bahamas. I guess that's an object, actually. But again, adding an object and adding a prepositional phrase does not change the fact that this is still a simple sentence. Okay, the next type of sentence is a compound sentence. So a compound sentence is two or more independent clauses together. So still with a compound sentence, there are no dependent clauses. It's still only independent clauses. However, there are two or more. And these are often joined by a conjunction. So here are some of the most commonly used conjunctions, which are and, but, or, yet, for, so, etc. Etc. is not a conjunction. I'm just letting you know there are more conjunctions you can use, but these are the most common ones. However, I will say that the maximum independent clauses I would recommend, and I think most grammarians or English teachers would recommend, is 3. Otherwise, it just gets really wordy and a little too long. And like I mentioned earlier, English speakers, we don't typically write that many clauses in a sentence. So if you, as a second, as with someone as English as your second language, even if your language you use 5, 6, 7 clauses, we're just not going to have the attention span. And so it's better to keep it the maximum at 3. And even then, 3 is kind of a lot. So here are 2 examples that I have, or excuse me, 3. So the first one, I usually work on Mondays and Wednesdays, but I'm also working on Thursday this week. So 2 independent clauses connected by the conjunction but. The second, my son is sick today, so I decided to work from home. Again, 2 independent clauses connected by the conjunction so. And finally, I walked to my car and I discovered a flat tire, so I called my husband to come help me. So here we actually have 3 independent clauses, and we have 2 separate conjunctions. We have and between the first 2, and then we have so after the comma. And so here, I didn't put a comma between the first 2 independent clauses because they are very closely related to each other. They happened, and they're also 2 very short independent clauses, and so sometimes if you want to keep adding information, you don't have to put a comma between 2 very short independent clauses like that first part of the sentence. But then, so I wanted to show the result of the sentence, of the first part of the sentence, I did add a comma and use the conjunction so for the rest of the sentence. But still, this is a little wordy. Grammatically, the sentence is great, but if I wanted to change it to be a little simpler, I might have said, I walked to my car to discover a flat tire, so I called my husband to come help me. So again, I think I would still only choose to use 3 independent clauses in a compound sentence. Okay, moving on to complex sentences. So a complex sentence has 1 independent clause and 1 or more dependent clauses. So still the base of the sentence, that independent clause, there's only 1. But now we're adding in some dependent clauses, so there can be 1 or more. And remember, a dependent clause can act as a noun, an adjective, or an adverb when it's used as a clause in a sentence. So here I have 3 examples. You may recognize the first one. While I was driving to the bank, my mother called me. Here, the independent clause is my mother called me, and the dependent clause is while I was driving to the bank. Second example, she is the new teacher that will be joining our department in the fall. She is the new teacher is the independent clause, and that will be joining our department in the fall is the dependent clause. And this is actually an adjective clause describing teacher in the sentence. And then finally, tonight we will do whatever you want to do. Here, the independent clause is tonight we will do, and the dependent clause is whatever you want to do. And here, this is acting as a noun clause. It is the object of the verb do. And finally, the compound complex sentence. So here we're just adding more. There are two or more independent clauses plus one or more dependent clauses. But I do want to say again, the maximum clauses recommended, I would say 3 to 4. Okay, now when I say 3 to 4, this can be a combination of independent and dependent clauses, but again, it can get really wordy really quickly if you are exceeding that 3 mark. 3 is pretty common for a compound complex sentence, and 4 can be common too, but more than that, it just gets way too wordy, and so I just want you guys to be aware of that. So here are my 3 examples. And actually, these are the same examples as the previous slide. I've just added an extra dependent clause to show you how they work. So the first one, while I was driving to the bank, my mother called me and we talked for over an hour. So the same thing, except I added an extra independent clause at the end, and we talked for over an hour. So this one has 1 dependent and 2 independent. The second example, I recommended my friend Bernie for the open position, so she is the new teacher that will be joining our department in the fall. Again, I added an additional independent clause at the beginning of the sentence, which is I recommended my friend Bernie for the open position. And then finally, I know you've had a long week, so tonight we will do whatever you want to do. Again, this has 2 independent clauses and 1 dependent clause. And I do want to say that these are not the only combination of any of these sentence structures that I gave you, but this is just an example of how they work. And so there are endless combinations of these types of clauses. Okay, so now let's move on to our last section, which is about lengthening sentence and shortening sentences. And so first of all, I want to talk about lengthening sentences. So this section is for those of you who struggle to lengthen your sentences. So maybe this is because in your native language, simple sentences are more common, or maybe you just struggle to produce more information or to get your words onto paper. And so I just want to emphasize that a variety of length is super important because monotony can be so boring, and so you want to strive for more than simple sentences. But again, sometimes simple sentences can be long because they have additional phrases and things, but you do want to try to have a variety of clause combinations in your sentence structures. And so I want to look at practicing lengthening sentences. And so here I have 3 examples. So what I want you to do is take a minute to read these 3 sentences. You can pause the lecture if you would like to do that. And then on the next slide, we're going to look at different ways to combine these sentences. So think about how these sentences can be combined into either compound sentences or compound complex sentences, or just complex sentences. Okay, so this is how I combined these sentences. In the first one, these 2 sentences, my mother likes to drink coffee, my father enjoys reading the newspaper. They're the same exact sentence structure, and so it may be good to combine them with some kind of transitional phrase or some connector or even a conjunction. So this is just my example. You may have combined them in a different way, but I said, my mother likes to drink coffee while my father enjoys reading the newspaper. And the second one, 3 very short sentences, and so instead of these 3 short ones, I combined it into 1 long one. So, Sally is good at archery, but she prefers soccer because that is what many of her friends play. And you even see I replaced some of the words because I didn't want to repeat the word soccer twice, and so I changed that last sentence into kind of a noun clause, what many of her friends play. And then finally, again, it's just 3 sentences that could easily be combined. So I just combined the first 2 because he is overweight. It's just a really short sentence. So I changed the last one to, my friend eats cupcakes every day, so he is overweight. He should probably reduce his dessert consumption. That last sentence is a simple sentence, but I think it's fine as is. Again, you want to use a variety, so some simple sentences are good. You just don't want to use only simple sentences. Okay, now moving on to our very last section, which is about shortening sentences. So, this is for those of you who don't know when to stop a sentence. Okay, so that may be for some of our Spanish or even Portuguese speakers. I know there are other languages like that. Those are just the two that I've had a lot of experiences with. Um, with students who don't know when to stop a sentence. That's because in some languages, commas work the same way as periods, but in English, a period is a full stop, it's a complete thought. And so, again, the general rule is that 3 to 4 clauses are the maximum in a sentence. You don't want to exceed that, otherwise, it's going to be way, way, way too wordy. And again, your reader's going to get confused. And so here I gave you 2 examples of sentences with appropriate length. So the first one is the same one from a previous slide. I recommended my friend Bernie for the open position, so she is the new teacher that will be joining our department in the fall. This has 3 clauses. And then the second one is a new one. Even though English seems to be the future language of the world, some people argue that French could be another candidate since it is used in a variety of regions. So this is actually, it has, I think, one dependent clause, one independent clause. Some people argue that French could be another candidate. And then 2 dependent clauses, the section at the beginning starting with even though, and the section at the end starting with since. So both of these are great because they just use 3 clauses, and you see how long they are and they get pretty wordy. So you really want to aim for 3 if you're trying to shorten your sentences. Okay, so here's another quick practice. So what I want you to do is take a minute and pause the lecture, and I want you to read through these 2, well, they almost look like paragraphs, these 2 sentences, and I want you to figure out how they can be reduced or shortened in the best way. So again, remember, try not to use more than 3 clauses in a sentence. And also you may want to omit some words or replace them with pronouns if it seems a little wordy. So go ahead and pause. Okay, so I'm not going to take the time to read the original examples. I'm just going to read how I reduced them. And so what I did for the first one is in blue. A campus rally was attended by more than 1,000 students, period. 5 students were arrested by campus police for disorderly conduct, period. Several others were charged, excuse me, that should be a D at the end of that word, by campus administrators with organizing a public meeting, no S, sorry about all of my spelling mistakes, being issued with a permit. And so you can see that I actually reduced the first 2 to just simple sentences because they already had lots of words in them. And so I think it was just a little easier to do that, especially since the second 2 sentences were related to each other, talking about students that were charged. And so I just kept them into 3 separate sentences in order to avoid wordiness and to reduce the amount of clauses, and because that first sentence is just way too long. Okay, and in the second example, I reduced quite a few of the words because they kept using the word murder, and so I was trying to reduce that just a little bit. And they were just a little redundant with some of the words. And so what I reduced it to was a large number of people enjoy reading murder mysteries regularly, period. These people are not themselves murderers, nor would they enjoy seeing someone commit an actual murder, period. In addition, they probably would not like solving a murder in real life, period. And so really what I did with this is that the original sentence used nor twice, and so that's a little redundant and it's just way too wordy. And so I created a second sentence using nor only once, and so then the very last sentence, I added a transitional phrase in addition, and then kept that, and I changed that sentence to negative, just to avoid using nor so many times. Okay, so that's all about sentence structures today. I hope that this was a good review for you and that it will be helpful for you to use a variety of sentence structures to reduce your sentence fragments, and also help you lengthen or shorten sentences depending on what your weakness is.